Welcome into this episode of How to Ride a Roller Coaster. I'm David Ezell, and today I'm joined by Riggs Eckelberry. He's the founder and CEO of OriginClear, which is transforming the water industry one startup at a time. How's it going?
Well, in fact, we're having an amazing time with the startup we're working on. Back in January, we announced a letter of intent to merge it with, I'm not going to get technical, but there's these blank check companies on the NASDAQ that are founded just to acquire companies. You know, they have a bundle of money.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we signed a letter of intent to merge this startup of ours, Water on Demand. And I unfortunately can't comment further than that one LOI, but I can tell you it's exciting.
That's fantastic. So let's start right there with Water on Demand. Before we dive into your background, how you got to where that is, let's tell us a little bit more about what's going on right now.
I'll have to just back up a little bit because so I was in high tech for just a couple of decades. And when I finally felt I could be a CEO, the backers that I went to said, well, fine, but it's not going to be in tech. It's going to be in algae, green.
Interesting.
All of a sudden, I was in the algae industry as a CEO of a small public company. And it was amazing. It was fantastic. I was on all the big shows. You know, Stuart Varney called me, I'll call you Algae Man, you know, all that fun stuff, which was great, except that algae collapsed when the price of oil collapsed below $50, and we had to pivot. We can talk more about this whole pivoting thing that I think is critical. But we got in the water industry and we found that it could not change. The water industry was not amenable to change. Like this big governmental installation that does everything for you and everything will be fine, except it wasn't fine.
Yeah.
We know water infrastructure in this country and all over the world is a mess. Only 20% of all sewage in the world is ever treated. The rest is dumped. Now, it's a bit better in the US, but not much. So we have a lot of bad news, and a lot of people assume it's fine. So it took us a long time to start to move the needle. In 2015, we acquired a company which is now our McKinney Operations Center, Progressive Water. That was great. Give us good client base and so forth. 2016, I fell in love with decentralized water. There was a seminal Lux Research webinar that basically said it's a thing that increasingly, because of overloaded infrastructure, business, industry, and agriculture is doing their own thing, self-reliance. They're treating their own water, whether it's a housing development or a farm or a car dealership or an RV campground, whatever. They're doing their own water treatment. And we realized that, hey, this is the solution to the underfunded infrastructure in America, which is take the load off. Don't have it do as much. And industry and agriculture treat 90%. They use 90% of all water, right? Let's not worry about the 10%. Let's worry about the 90%. Get them off the system. And I'll be telling you about Water on Demand, which makes it attractive for them. And then the 10%, which is the true audience for the local utility, gets treated right. In Ireland, water is free. Why isn't it free here? Because you have industry and agriculture basically hogging the system and making it expensive for everyone. Get them off the grid, relieve it. Now the people can have clean water, inexpensive or free.
I would have never put that number at 20%. That just blows my mind. Had you asked me that, especially here, like you mentioned, other parts of the world, sure, I could maybe see it at 20, but I would have at least put, you know, the U.S. maybe 50 to 60%. But I mean, knowing that number is so low,
That's fair.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like something's off.
It is better in the U.S., but for example, look at in the Carolinas, you've got all those poultry farms that are just dumping nitrates in the river. In Florida, you've got a lot of sewage outflows, for example, that are creating algae, toxic algae in Lake Okeechobee and places like that. There's a lot of problems. And also, think about this. We have antiquated sewer lines, so they break and they start to leak into the groundwater, the aquifer, and now it pollutes that. Nobody can dig a well and drink the water out of that well. You have to sanitize it and filter it. It's not clean. Wow. What does that say? It's like pretty horrendous.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about the Water on Demand. Is that individualized, or how does that kind of work?
Okay, so first of all, as I say, we're targeting industry and agriculture because that's the 90% users. And there's two challenges. The first one is technology. You got to take that big utility scale stuff down to the corner of a brewery, which is going to be 150 square feet.
Yeah.
And we have that. We created a company in 2018 called Modular Water Systems. These are water systems in a box, highly standardized, assembly line. Okay, you want one, boom, we'll get you one quickly. And that has proven to be extremely successful, and it's growing. But then we ran into the other thing, and this really, we were growing all this up until COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, I was like, uh-oh, big reset.
Yeah.
We didn't know in February of 2020 that there would be a bailout, right? The CARES Act, all that stuff.
Sure.
We went, oops, there's going to be a problem. So people are going to be capital starved. And that's when we came up with the other part of it, which is you want a water system and you're a brewery. You don't have $1 million for a water system. You make beer, right? So just sign here. We'll deliver a machine. It remains ours. And we bill you on the meter just like you're accustomed to.
Interesting.
And they go, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And that brings us to the third part, which is how are these machines funded? Well, we made it possible for regular everyday investors to come in and invest in these bundles of water systems, much like an oil well partnership, these master limited partnerships that are a big success.
Yeah.
We're doing it for water. So we like to say water like an oil well.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. So are you guys national right now? I know that, like you said, a lot of it is here in North Texas and kind of that McKinney area, but are you guys national now?
We are. We're doing it now. So we're doing there's a set of initials, DBOO, design, build, own, operate. We do the D&B right now. In other words, we do the conventional, we'll sell it to you, and we'll maintain it. The water on demand concept moves us into OO, where we own and operate it. And we're just, you don't even worry about it. We take care of everything, we maintain it, and we just charge you on the meter. That is the big next phase, because water as a service is coming. It's the natural thing. It's why make people have big capital expenses when they can just essentially pay for their usage?
Riggs, I have to ask, what is the mindset for all of this? Going back to where you started this and it all first kind of came from, what was that kind of shift like whenever you dove into this industry?
Well, I think it's got to come back a little bit to my background, because early on, and this was really a factor of the tech industry, but even before that, I have a very experimental mindset. And so rather than over-intellectualize things like, okay, take this, throw it out there and see if it works, right? And then be nimble enough to go, okay, let me adjust it. Let me tweak it, tweak, right? And so I have this saying, invite the unexpected. You want to invite the unexpected, because how you're going to succeed in this market, you're not going to succeed by being the same as everyone else.
Right.
You're going to have a special sauce. In our case, we were looking to differentiate ourselves from every other water company out there, because the water industry grows very, very slowly. 10-15% growth a year is considered great. And this is why the big water companies, they do a lot of acquisition, because that's how they get their numbers up. They just keep buying companies.
Yeah.
American Water Works has $1 billion a year M&A budget. Well, it's easy for them to just buy $100 million companies, right?
Sure. Keep it clear.
Right? Keep it simple. And so you have this very static water industry. So how do we break out of it? And because we were already a public company and we were developing things, we turned what was a liability, which is we were burning money and getting investors into an asset, which is, hey, we do a great job of bringing in investors. Let's put them into these capital resources and create eventually a generational asset for them.
Interesting.
Because they're going into a royalty type situation that goes on as long as that fund continues.
It's fabulous. And so that's where you guys are now. That's kind of the shift after the first part has been kind of launched. That's the shift now.
Right. So Modular Water Systems is a success. First, the Progressive Water entity in McKinney has been doing a great job all along, but in 2022 they took a big leap, and almost doubled their numbers, which is a lot for water. And so did Modular Water. So they both just kind of took off.
Wow.
And as a result, we found ourselves with great performance. And now we're combining those two with this brand new idea of the pay per gallon, right? The water on demand pay per gallon. Here's the thing that we know that investors like you and me, we're people who do pretty well. We have a little bit of cash, and like, well, what do I do with it?
Yeah.
You got to put it in, an S&P 500. Like, well, I don't believe that stuff anymore.
Index funds until you finish. Yeah.
Or crypto. Oh my
right.
God. Oh Lord. I don't want to know. Well, it's been great for capital losses. Let's put it that way.
That's it.
So a lot of people are going, well, how do I get an edge? And we know that getting in early on something is good. But, if you look at the Airbnb rounds, you can look it up on the internet, it was all insiders until the IPO.
Yeah.
And so how do you become an insider? So we crafted, it's like, you know what? The water industry is it's exploding, it's breaking out of the monopoly. Let's open it up to regular people. So we have this saying, water is the people's asset, both for consumption, but also for investment. Somebody made a prediction that the first trillionaire is going to be in water. We said, no. We want 1 million millionaires, not 1 trillionaire.
Right.
Let's democratize this thing. Let's have some fun. And for some reason, the elite has not really caught on. It's just beginning. There was a unicorn in May that had all the kind of wonderful, fund support and so forth. But it didn't explode yet the way AI did, right? I mean,
right.
We have the time to do it and do it right, and to have an innovative model that is going to resonate, and then we can start cloning it beyond America.
And I think that's such a fascinating segue to kind of jump into, because I think a lot of times people that are in that position, like ourselves, where how do you become somebody that can get in from the ground floor? How can you get in early with something that, 99% of people just don't know? You don't know about those early rounds with Airbnb or Uber or any of those types of companies. Those happen almost in a silo, in a vacuum away from our vision. So this is amazing. And I think that there's so much opportunity for it because, I keep going back to that 20% number. The need is so large, so the opportunity is so great. So, like I said, I love what you guys are doing.
Well, and think about it. Let's take a look at India, where there's a real problem. India is a wonderful subcontinent. It's coming up in the world, but their water infrastructure sucks.
Yeah.
They just basically don't have it. They got people in the sewers who are dying from the sewer gases. They're literally shoveling this stuff. What do? Well, they're not going to, who's going to come up with $500 billion or whatever? That's a huge, huge country.
Yeah.
Well, why not just have decentralized from day one, where it's self-reliant pods, both in industry, in farms, in housing developments, eventually individual homes? It makes a whole lot more sense. And then you have a small municipality to supply the fresh water. The treated water gets recycled, and then they can dump it into the aquifer to recharge it, and everybody's happy. So that's a model that we need to learn from. Let's take a look back home here at Miami-Dade County. It was built without any urban planning back in the day. And so there's about over 100,000 septic tanks in the county. And they fail, they leak, they're literally, because the water level is rising, or maybe the ground's subsiding, I don't know
right.
which, but whatever. It's literally these septic systems are coming in contact with the aquifer, and it's a real problem. It's a real, it's a sanitary issue. So the county is going, okay, let's spend billions and connect sewage to every single one of these things. Well, number one, it's supposed to be $6 billion. It'll be 10, 12 by the time they're done. Secondly, it'll tear up streets for 20 years. Why not just give a rebate to those septic owners to put in one of those self-reliant systems that are mature by now? The poop goes into a sludge tank that gets emptied out once a year by a truck, and that's it. It's done. But here's the problem. Miami-Dade County is not thinking that way. They like sewage. They like pipes. They like to raise a lot of money and have the big plant. But that doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
So here's our approach. We're not talking to Miami-Dade County. We don't talk to late adopters. I learned that in high tech. You talk to the early adopters. You talk to the people who really, really need it. They're being fined, or as we see in North Texas, that they're building a housing development that's 20 miles from the local sewage plant, so that's impossible. So they need a self-contained thing. So they know they need it. You don't have to market it to them. They know, I got to have this thing. It's a flying J in the middle of the country on a freeway. Yeah. No connection to anything. It needs its own sewage connection. RV campgrounds, mobile home parks, all that stuff. So the first generation for us is the users that are forced to be self-reliant. And we don't go to, there's a wonderful, wonderful book called Inside the Tornado. It describes the high-tech life cycle, right? The high-tech life cycle always starts with, I call it the nose of the armadillo, because right there at the beginning is the super early adopters, the people who actually used the Newton PDA back in the day.
Right.
Those people. They just do it because it's new. And that gets you in there. You start progressing along the snout of the armadillo. Now you get to what's called the strategic buyers, who are buying something for a good, valid, competitive reason, or they're legally being fined or whatever. After that, there's something called the chasm, which is something you have to leap over to get wide adoption. And that is how do you get there? Well, at the bottom of this, as it starts rising up, the very bottom of it, something called, this guy calls it the bowling alley, where you create a bunch of applications and a bunch of users, and after a while you get critical mass, and boom, it takes off. All of a sudden you have a tornado of adoption, right? Now, that's very common in high tech. It happened with, back in the 80s when I had a computer company in New York City, we saw two competitors show up for big enterprise databases. One was called Ingress, and one was called Oracle. And Oracle did not work. Ingress worked great. Well, guess who survived? Oracle. Why? Because Larry Ellison was smart enough to go for the adoption.
Interesting.
And the users are like, well, it doesn't work too well, but everybody's buying it, so it'll get worked out. It'll get figured out. Whereas Ingress is like, we will not ship anything if it does not work, and they're not German. I'm not. That was not a German thing. I was just saying that they had this conservative attitude, right? As a result, you've got to go for the velocity. When there's a tornado of adoption, then it's a matter of how many seats can you get, how fast.
Yeah.
It's market share. It's no longer about proving the technology, but it's about who has the momentum. And then at the top of that curve, the back end of it is the conservative guys and the skeptics. And you don't market to them. Why? Because they'll follow.
Yeah.
They'll follow the trend, right? So people say to me, oh, why don't you go get a grant from Tallahassee? I'm like, nope, not going there. I'm not doing it. Because they'll put me through the ringer and they'll give the deal to their golfing buddy anyway. So no thanks. We deal with users that are desperate. And I think that's the key, in entrepreneurship is find the where's the real demand, and don't rest until you have it. It's too easy to just go, okay, this is good. I'm making environmental test kits, but nobody's buying environmental test kits, but I'm making environmental test kits.
Right.
You got to find the traction. And that's, I think, the key.